Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Film Score podcast. My guest today is Laura Karpman, and we talk about her two new scores, one for the latest MCU Marvel film, The Marvels, and the other for American Fiction. These present two drastically different movies, and, not surprisingly, two drastically different scores. We spend most of the time talking about The Marvels because, well, that's the one that's, as of now, out. American Fiction comes out in about a month. You can look at the episode notes for the exact date. Laura's score for The Marvels is really cool, and it took me, after watching the movie, another couple listens to really digest everything. There's so much going on, so much experimentation, diversity of sound and technique. It's awesome to listen to. Whereas American Fiction is more restrained in its palette, given that it generally sticks to a jazz style with a number of variations throughout. Really fun talking about both of those. And I will say, while we're talking about the Marvels, there is one very brief spoiler. You'll hear a chime, and if you just skip ahead 15 seconds, you'll skip it entirely. And now, of course, you can find out more about Laura by looking at her social media, her website. You can do the same for me. And yeah, I know that normally these come out every 2 weeks, and this is on the heels of an episode just 1 week ago, but I had a few too many interviews and I needed to crank them out a bit. So you'll get one more next week, and then I'll be back on the normal schedule for a little bit. I think I'm gonna take a minor mid-season hiatus, which is wild to say at this point. It feels like we've just started. Probably the end of December. And then eventually get back on track. But that's for the future. Until then, sit back and I hope you enjoy. Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. How have you been?
I'm great. It's good to see you, Nick.
So you've just come off of scoring The Marvels, which came out as of right now about 4 days ago. You've got American Fiction coming out in about a month. Are you taking this time to relax a little bit, or now that those two are in the box, are you keeping moving on to the next project?
I actually stumbled my way through composing music this morning. And when I say stumbled, I mean I stumbled because I've been doing because the actors were on strike. I did a lot of press for the Marvels, and boy, it's a lot, you know. So I've been busy doing other stuff. So it'll feel good to get back to composing.
On that, and to give everyone a little insight into this, as the actors' strike had been going, I had been getting more emails from studios themselves about talking to composers, which is unusual for me. And so, for you doing more press because of it for the Marvels, was that something that you're used to, something that you enjoy, or was that a bit too much and you're ready to kind of pull away a little bit?
I really enjoyed it, and I think it's good for the community too. Listen, nobody here wanted this double strike, but I think it was a nice opportunity to highlight the crafts and the people who work behind the scenes. And actually, we were talking about that with some friends of mine the other day, how it was nice to hear the process for editors, production designers, visual effects supervisors, composers. And so because we were not on strike, we were able to kind of step in as best we could and do some of that. However, of course, it's always, 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 always better to have actors promoting the films for obvious reasons. So it's good to not have to do it, at least as heavily for American Fiction.
I totally agree. I think for the normal person, it's hard to realize, or maybe you just don't realize just how many people are involved in making a film. And so having that as an opportunity for so many other people to actually be talking about what they're doing and things that you as the ordinary listener might not realize, I think is very cool. I promise we'll get into the Marvels and touch on American Fiction, but just because the guilds and the strikes came up, I know that you're someone who I've seen it on your Twitter, for instance, has talked about wanting a composers union or raising that idea. Obviously, it's had a fraught history for, 35 years plus, but much longer than that as well. With the success of those two, the WGA and the SAG strikes, do you think there's a future for a composers guild or union, or is that still something that looks maybe more distant or remote?
There are some really complicated issues for us. And I mean, this is like, we could take up our whole time talking about this because I've thought a lot about it. Basically, we were ruled against by the National Labor Relations Board because of the package deal, fundamentally, because we will pay out musicians and engineers and everything that goes into making a score on our own. So we were deemed independent contractors and so unable to organize. So I don't think a union's in the cards for us as long as those deals are in place. But when I was governor at the Academy, I saw two things. First of all, everybody else in Hollywood is unaware that we don't have a union, right? They think that we are unionized. And other guilds, like for example the WGA, the GGA, SAG, collect royalties, right, for their members, but we've got these PROs, performance rights organizations, that collect our royalties, and there are, three or four of them. So I think in some ways that divides our communities. And then plus the wealth, in fact, of our communities goes to these PROs. So I think that's something to look at. I would love to see workplace protections happen, especially for our younger people who go and working in studios where they feel unsafe. I would love to see healthcare. So I think there's some basic things that we can start to come together and do as a community. And I'd be very interested in getting involved in those discussions.
I 100% agree. One, that I think no one realizes that everyone else has a guild except composers. Even the musicians performing, I
Yeah.
think, have their own union. But yeah, also those protections, because you see, especially recently, so many news stories and articles about some of what goes on, and it's at least good that that exposure is now there, and that we as fans are kind of realizing some of these issues. But it's one thing to have them exposed and kind of come out in the open, and it's something more to actually have something done. So I'm here in the camp of whether it's a union, a guild, some bare minimums at least.
Yeah.
I'm here rooting for y'all,
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
and hopefully, everyone else is listening and feels the same way. And like you said, we could be on that for a while. I did a solo episode kind of on that background, and I droned on for like half an hour. So we'll save that for another day.
Okay.
But going on to the Marvels, just came out. It's a very cool, exciting score. You're mixing all these themes in there, and there's a surprising amount of instrumental or sonic palette diversity in there. To narrow that down, when you first came onto this project, what were those initial conversations like with the director Nia DaCosta, and just for you kind of figuring out what is this going to sound like?
Well, Nia said she wanted a space opera. So I thought that's pretty cool. And then she also talked about low voices. Like this is
Hmm.
she had this idea that low voices in space would be very cool. So we really started out talking about a lot of vocals, and I put together a vocal session early on where I had three very, very low singers, and then I had an Indian Carnatic singer, a South African singer, an Indonesian singer, people from different vocal traditions, and I put them together and said, listen, don't blend. Let's just see what happens. So I think a lot of those kind of evocative space vocals came out of playing in those spaces. I did another session like that later in London, and then two more subsequent larger choral sessions with that same kind of concept in mind, but we added a bunch of countertenors who are people identify as men singing in their falsetto voices. So it's a very sort of surreal, ethereal sound. Also, a lot of what I talked about initially with Nia, was what does space sound like? I went out and devised a few different solutions for that, which we can get into. But fundamentally, she wanted a new theme also for the Marvels. And she
Hmm.
wanted it to be like an Avenger style theme because Captain Marvel, which was so great with a great score by Pinar Toprak, she wanted it to not be about any one individual, but about the three of them kind of coming together. And so she wanted a theme that did that as well.
The problem with that answer is you hit too many different things that I want to cover, and I can't do them
Okay.
all at once. It'll be the most impossible to follow question in the world. On that last point, that's something that I think a lot of Marvel fans and people that are watching these movies think about and talk about
Uh huh.
on, how sometimes there is a lot of thematic coherence and sometimes there isn't. And so when you're approaching this, and obviously the director of any film here, Nia's got her say, and it's the film that she's creating, and you're there supporting that.
Yeah.
But how does the decision of the conversation go on whether to pull in some of the prior themes, the legacy themes, or whether you're just going to move forward and create something new instead?
I mean, it just depends on the project. On What If, for example, which I also do for Marvel, we play with this all the time. The idea is to play with those themes and to present them as is or modify them or obscure them. So all of that very, very much plays into the What If score. This one was different. I mean, Nia wanted a new score with new themes and a new sound. So it just depends on what the people who are working on this want and then how you can best, support those desires, as you said.
So going on what you had just mentioned and what you'd mentioned previously about creating this new sound and especially creating the sound for space. 'Cause
Yeah.
so much of this movie does take place in space. There are a lot of elements of kind of the awing nature of the cosmos. And you go back to 2001 and probably even films before that, and you have all of these very classic films that in a lot of ways define what we think of as the music for space. And
Right.
it's really easy, I think, to follow those paths, do something that the audience will be familiar with, but maybe overly so as well. So in this film, how do you strike the balance of something that for the listener feels evocative of space, but doesn't feel like something that we've been hearing for the last 50 years?
I'll give you sort of a long two-part answer. The first
Great.
part is the departures, which are creating these kind of vocal textures that are multicultural, that really are these combinations of different world musics. The second was I actually commissioned sonifications from a really interesting computer what am I saying? Computer data, that's hard to say, scientist, Christina Talon. And what that means is that you basically map data in space and then transcribe it and then create MIDI data out of that. And so I gave her a few plot points in the film and she got that data and translated that into MIDI and then we created sounds out of that. And then the third sort of part of that was working with Evelyn Glennie, who's Dame Evelyn Glennie, who's an amazing, amazing percussionist. And one of the extraordinary things about Evelyn Glennie is that she is profoundly deaf. She plays and she hears with her body. So often she'll play barefoot and literally feel the sounds vibrating up through her feet. When you're in space, according to Nia, there is no sound, but sound can vibrate against an object, right? So it can vibrate against a human body or a spaceship or another kind of matter. So this idea of feeling sound rather than hearing sound was really organic to the way that Evelyn makes music. So that was a big part of it. Now, having said that, there was a point in the film, and now I can talk about it because it's out, where Carol is landing on the planet Tarnax and she's in the spaceship and she kind of takes off and it goes through the thing. And that was a really neat moment for me to compose because I did what you were saying. I mean, it has the voices in it. It's got Evelyn Glennie and it's got that stuff, but it's also got that like optimistic American view of, yeah, let's go out into space, and the theme, da, 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 like over the whole thing, the 12 French horns, and she's flying through space. And I loved doing that too. Other places where we're using these kind of more off-center ideas and kind of weirder environments, when she lands on another planet very early where Darben finds a bangle and, and other points when she's kind of floating out in space, there's a loneliness to that moment, I think, that I wanted to capture with some more eerie sounds. But, the fun thing about scoring these kinds of films and these kinds of projects is that, yeah, sometimes you want to hit the mark. Sometimes you want to just feel that feeling, and I think that's cool. I love that. I want to do that, as well as all of these other, like, more experimental textures.
It's funny you mentioned the eeriness. A lot of times when I'm watching a movie in preparation for an interview, I have my little notepad and I'm writing, but it's in the darkness, so what I
Right,
write is illegible.
right.
But one of the things that I wrote was about you have this sort of eerie cosmic feel, and it was
Yeah,
something that I think struck me as it felt right,
yeah.
but also didn't feel familiar. It felt unusual in the moment as well, and
W The
I
whole first
really
act is
appreciated
like
that.
that, right? The whole
Yes,
first part of
yes.
the film, whole first reel, I should say, not even first act, first reel, where, she's floating out in space. She and Monica are not really connecting. They're landing on the planet. She's attacked. The switches are happening. Nobody knows what's going on. You have all of these kinds of scenes. Kamala kind of flipping through space and coming up to Nick Fury. And that's the whole beginning of the film. So I definitely leaned into that. But then as they move through this sort of space of figuring out what's going on with their bodies and the switching, things begin to be a little bit more grounded, I think, in a way for the three of them. So that's why I kind of
Hmm.
started to introduce like that scene is the beginning of Reel 2 when she's flying and going to Tarnax before the negotiation with Darben. That felt right for that moment, and I was glad to write it.
It sounds like you had a lot of agency in creating the sound and the sonic palette, and I think that's something that maybe people don't necessarily expect from, I'd say, superhero films more broadly. I think a lot of people are quick to say that they all fall into one bucket, and so
It's just not
here
true.
it's
It's like
oh, that's exactly what I was gonna say.
it's
It's
just
very much not
completely
the
not
case here.
true. And I'll tell you, I know it also from working on What If, when I really am listening to the work that other people have done. And believe me, it's not in one bucket. You've got Ludwig Göransson, you've got Michael Giacchino, you've got Pinar, you've got Chris Beck. These are all really different composers who approach the genre differently. And the thing about these Marvel projects, this is my third one now and 2 series, which, I mean, What If is expansive. We've got season 2 coming out. I did Miss Marvel as well. And you've got a lot of room in these places creatively. I think once you come up with like that theme, because everybody needs the theme or a series of themes,
Hmm.
everybody needs the theme. And once you have the theme, you can do a lot. And there's a lot of room. And I can tell you is I'm always looking for spaces to be weird. And there's a lot of space to be weird in Marvel. Lots and lots and lots.
I think that's definitely true, and I think as well it seems like that's increasingly so. But with the Marvels, did you ever feel like there was a constraint there,
No,
or
I've never felt it ever on any Marvel project that I've worked on. Here's been my experience. They love music. They love big music. They like maximal music. They like music that's thematic and emotional. They like music they just love music. So it's like, as somebody who came from a lot of independent film and documentary, where people are always telling you less is more, working on a Marvel project, people are telling you more is more, and I love that.
that's that's awesome. So, I mean, it seems like this gives you the chance as well to flex your, well, we'll call them your weird muscles.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No, for sure. I mean, like, basically, on something like this, you sit around, you think for a long time, well, what does space sound like, and how do I reflect that? And then it's like, let me try this. And I did the voices, and then I thought, there's something else I need. Like, I need rumbles. I need weird things in the bottom. And it's, hey, maybe I should go record Evelyn and see how that works. And, there's like all of that is there. And then, of course, there are these spaces. And it's the first time I've actually talked about this because we had, everything was under wraps for so long. But when Darben disintegrates, that's an aleatoric cue, right? So that basically what we did is I gave
Mm.
each section of the orchestra a part of Darben's cue. So you had ba-do-da, 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 ba-do-da in the brass, and then you had the da 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 ba ba da in all the strings, and then so everybody was doing something different, and we just said go, and then Nora, my wife who conducted the score, would just make it louder and softer, and it was just cacophony. It was absolutely fantastic, and it's there in the movie.
That's awesome. And I think that sort of concept is something that maybe will surprise people to hear about, but like
Yeah.
it's so cool that you're given that sort of latitude to experiment, be weird, and I can tell seeing your face hearing you talk about it, have fun with the score too.
Oh, it was great. I loved every minute of working on that project. Every minute of it.
That's awesome. And these are things that have come up quite a few times, both in my questions and your answers, is the idea of the themes that we're hearing. I'll say the new theme for the Marvels is one I think's not just particularly appropriate, but also very memorable. That was like stuck in my head for I don't know the next 2 days after I saw the movie. And so, is there any sort of special process that you do or you take to sit down and come up with compose one of these themes?
When you do these themes, when you create the suites for any project, but certainly for Marvel, you basically have to have a theme and you've got to take it through paces, right?
Mm.
And the idea is that you've got to be able to show Nia and Kevin and others that the theme can exist in a multiple of dramatic situations, a multiplicity of dramatic situations. So this particular theme starts out very mysteriously, right? It's spacey. You've got the strings sliding around doing glissandos. You've got these kind of broken allophones and glockenspiels and all these weird kind of metallic sounds doing little portions of the theme. You've got some of the vocals that come in. And so you show the theme in that sort of space. Then, of course, the strings start to come in. So you start the build, which is something I played a lot with in Ms. Marvel, which I really like, this idea of doing
Mm.
a straight build. Like, how can you continue to grow and grow and grow without actually changing musical material that much? And it comes out of like Ravel's Bolero, right? It's like, how can you do one of these slow builds that you can do it dynamically, you can do it orchestrationally with repetition. But that's what gives it that kind of energy until it winds and winds and winds and winds and winds and winds till you can't almost hear that one more time. And then it breaks into the main theme, with the 12 French horns, and then kind of continues to put that theme through its kind of action adventure paces. So the idea is you can show it in these various ways, in these various environments, to show the people that you're working with that this theme is a good one and can survive a movie or ultimately a franchise if that's what it turns into.
Interesting. That is very interesting to hear. And I do want to move to American Fiction really
Oh,
quick.
great.
But before that, one thing I did want to mention and raise is the initial sequence on Aladna, which is a planet where everyone communicates by singing. And
Yeah.
on the score release, it's like this really complex, moving 7 minute or so cue.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just hear really quick how much of that was coming from you. I don't know your part in the actual vocals as well because
Yeah.
you have a number of those performances too.
So basically, it started with two songs by James Murphy. What you see in the film is Faraladna, do da 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 da. So that James Murphy did, and he also did the duet between Carol and Prince Jan. And, those had been various lengths through various iterations of the film. I was brought in to work on this, I'd say in June,
Mm.
and I created all the orchestrations and all the surrounding vocals for those two things, as well as go into the galaxy, with that whole march, that that was all me. And then I created the music in the banquet, and I recorded the singers because, of course, if you have a planet where everybody's singing all the time, think about any film, right? Any film has ADR, right? Dialogue replacement, where,
Mhm.
you create a crowd scene that gets done in post-production, right? So all of those scenes were done in London with my choir. But with a choir like that, you can't just say, oh, gee, just do background vocals. So I had to feed individual lines to all of those people. So when you hear the soundtrack, did sort of like a cute mix for the soundtrack where you hear stuff really in the forefront that you might not hear in the course of the film.
Yeah.
And the attention, da 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 da, that was mine too. So I created, probably 75% of what you hear there, and then James Murphy did the kind of the meat of those 2 songs in pre-production because they had to shoot to them.
Yeah, and that was, I mean, it's a fun sequence both in the film, but
Yeah.
also in the score because I think it very much leans into, I don't want to say like wacky because that's not
Yeah.
quite right.
No, I mean, I think
Um,
it is wacky, and I came up with all of these ideas, and Nia and I discussed this extensively, like, if you're on a musical planet, like, okay, what happens? Is there an orchestra playing? Are there bands in various places? Are there DJs spinning set
hmm.
pieces? When Prince Jan enters, does he have 4 entrances? I would imagine he would have at least 4, if not 8, for various costume changes, you know? I had this idea that there were different orchestras and different kinds of ensembles. So, like, when they're marching through town, they have like percussion, right? So they had world percussion. So this idea
Hmm.
is that on this planet, there's every kind of imaginable music, and even music that we can't imagine. And for those of you who are really into this, once you get it at home, if you go into the banquet scene and kind of press pause, you'll see in the background instruments that were constructed. So all of the source music is really coming from these like wacky instruments that they have on Aladdin. So I think wacky is a great word. And I think Nia would like it too.
Awesome. Well, I'll rescind saying it wasn't right. I do appreciate that sort of like level of thought and detail
Yeah.
on things that I'll tell you I didn't notice those instruments in the background whatsoever. So next time I see it, and hopefully other people after they listen will they'll take a look at and get to see those wacky
Yeah, but
instruments.
you'll see the violin instrument, you'll see a tuba-like
Hmm.
instrument, you'll see saxophones. I mean, they're these kind of wavy pieces, but if you look at them, you'll see them.
Awesome. It's great to hear, and like I mentioned before, I think it comes through in the voice as well, but like definitely just talking how much you enjoyed this
Oh,
project.
I
And I
loved
think
it.
it really comes through in hearing the music as well. And I talked to Brian Tyler earlier this year about his score for the Super Mario Bros. Movie, and it was the same thing. He was like giddy, and it was like he was a little kid first playing those games when he was talking about those. So I
Yeah.
think it comes through in the music so well. But moving to American Fiction, which is your other score for Q4 of 2023 comes
Yeah,
out next month.
that's right.
That is an entirely different film, entirely different sound. Very jazzy, very piano based instead. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you came onto that palette and that style as well for that film?
Yeah, I mean, the lead character, his name is Thelonious Ellison and his nickname is Monk. So for those of you jazz fans, you know Thelonious Monk, incredible composer and pianist and very unique sound. So we knew that we wanted the score to pay homage to this great jazz musician and for it to lean into jazz. But, it also had to live in the world of film scoring because it is a drama, it's a comedy, it turns on a dime kind of stylistically. Not stylistically, it doesn't leave the world of jazz, but things happen that are very different in the film.
Hmm.
It's, acerbic satire 1 minute, it's high comedy the next minute, and it's a family drama with tragedy the next minute, and he falls in love, and all this kind of stuff happens to him professionally. So all of those things had to be hit. And so it's really this hybrid, I think, of jazz and scoring. And the instrumentation, of course, is vastly different from the Marvels. But I grew up playing jazz and classical simultaneously. I studied at Juilliard. I studied classical concert music, and then I would go out at night and play jazz and sing in bars. So I mean, this duality was always a part of my life. But like, there's a lot of jazz in the Marvels too. Darben's theme is completely jazzy. I hear it as jazz, and so it seeps into even my most kind of modernist orchestral writing. But yes, indeed, American Fiction really focuses on that, and it leans into two themes, which is Monk's theme, which is kind of edgy, monkish music, bio boo-ba-da-dee-ah, a 5/4 thing with sevenths in the bass. And then the other theme is the family theme, which is this kind of fluid theme. Da dee o dee bo ba da ba ba ya da 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 bo be o dee. Ba-be-do-da-da-da-da-da. So it's this kind of like almost rubbery theme. And a lot of times in the film, it's with this incredible flute player who's also a scoring intern in my studio, Elena Penderhughes, who's great. She tours with Herbie Hancock. She's amazing.
Mm,
She'll play with me, but it won't quite be together, which is
mm,
part of the idea behind Families. I also had Patrice Rushen, the great composer and pianist, come in and play a lot of that score as well. So, it's a much smaller score than the Marvels, but it accomplishes, I think, many of the same things in that you've got a complicated dramatic arc that needs to be addressed and supported by a score that can roll with the punches of a film.
when you're working with those two on this score or other very talented or well known musicians who are coming in to play a particular instrument, how much of their personality would you say is coming through in what they're playing, and versus how much of it is you're the composer, this is your session, they've got to play exactly how you want?
Well, I mean, again, there are continuities between these two projects because
Mm-hmm.
you're sitting in a room with 100 orchestral musicians. They all come at that with a lifetime of experience. I in no way ever want to mute somebody's artistic vision, right? People play and they do things. And if it sounds right, you keep it. I think with Elena and with Patrice and the other musicians who performed in the film, I give people a lot of leeway to do things. And then a lot of times people will give me choices if we're recording remotely, or the
Mm.
case with Elena, she was here, we would work stuff out together. There's some improvisatory sections, but when you're doing a film score that's jazz based, you've got to let people improvise, but you also have to be able to have the ability to edit it and to move in and out of dialogue, because when somebody's improvising, the nature of improvisation is to just go. So, for example, if someone's doing a solo, I mean, this is probably a better answer to your question. And let me just think of something for a second. If you've got, where, whatever, you got something like that, that's not going to work. And the reason why that's not going to work is because there's no room for anything, a dialogue
Mm.
or anything that might happen. So if somebody's improvising a solo like that, I might say, do it more gesturally and then out. So I might then try this. Did it. You know, so you still get that feeling of improvisation, but you've got the space to be able to move stuff around and really accommodate it to picture and dialogue.
You'd mentioned that the improvisation is key in, or I suppose, like, comes very naturally in any sort of jazz-based score, which, for anyone, like, you listen to jazz, you ever see a jazz band, it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But when you have a score that isn't jazz-based, is there ever room for improvisation in there as well?
Yeah. When we did the Darben's Destruction, I mean, that's improv.
Mm.
That's the same thing, where basically you're giving somebody what we call box notation. You're giving them sort of pitches to play and saying, okay, I need you to do this for 10 bars, and I need you to start soft and get louder. And whatever order you do it or rhythm, that's up to you. So I do try to create spaces in that kind of work. It's aleatoric composition, it's called, but you try to create spaces where people can do stuff, because sometimes, especially in film scores and scores that are recorded to click, you want to work against that, in that to make something really very musical and not always feel like this is going somehow in the background, right? I think about that kind of stuff a lot. Yeah.
Can you expand a little more on that idea of going against the click?
Yeah, I mean, I think the really good scoring musicians know how to do it. But I mean, I write very gesturally, right? So if I'm writing a flute, if I've got like I mean, now I'm making up a cue, but let's say I have a string
Sure.
chord, and on top of it, I've got a flute going da boo-doo-dee, ba-doo-dee-doo-doo-dee, ba-doo-dee-doo-doo-dee. Now I'm singing jazz. You don't want to go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, you could, and it could be written out and notated that way, but you might just want to kind of, notate it that way and say, make this more gestural or feel free rhythmically. And so then a good musician will ignore the click, especially if you've got someone who can conduct and bring them back in at the right time.
Very interesting. Well, Laura, it was very cool seeing the Marvels. Like I said, I haven't seen American Fiction yet, but I was lucky enough to hear it. Two very different projects, very different scores. I think having them come out at almost back to back is a very cool showcase of your breadth, your diversity as a composer. So
Thank you.
it's really awesome to hear. And of course, they're both getting a lot of attention for some of the best of the year as well. So I don't know how much you pay attention to that, but if you don't, that's what a lot of people are saying at least. So
I really, really, really appreciate it. I, you know, I love this work. I've been doing it for a long time. And I think the thing that's cool about both of these projects is they really allow me to be me.
mm,
And I worked with filmmakers who embrace that. And, it's really a privilege to be able to do that, especially in association with a film project and projects both that are excellent in their own very different ways. So, Nick, I appreciate the interview.
and Laura, once again, I appreciate you coming to chat with me about both of those.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.